I'm curious, how many people actually write CSS on like a daily, weekly basis? Got a few of you? Okay. Well, I'm going to talk a bit about how Belly has structured our CSS and how we build some of our actual front-end applications around it. We built a lot of websites at Belly, quite a few. All these websites have different purposes tied behind them. They're all built on separate code bases. They all have duplicate styles. And they work fairly well, but we do come into some troubles. And I'll walk you through what this looks like. We have a member-facing website for members to basically go to our website, see what they're up to, view their points, things like that. But we also have a merchant-facing website tied to that as well, right? Two separate code bases, but very similar in duplicate styles tied behind it. And that becomes a little bit troublesome over time. We continue this on with a handful of merchant tools. So we have a merchant knowledge center where they can sign up and see different things that they may be doing with their platform. But there's also an analytical tool tied behind that as well, where they could see exactly how their business is performing. Now, these are each on separate code bases. And that gives us ease of development, allows us to work faster, we have less dependencies, but we are duplicating our styles as we work around this type of stuff. Now, this continues, right? And all of these are built into a service-oriented architecture. Service-oriented architecture for us is all of our websites are driven by a set of different APIs. And it's a design pattern where software basically provides a distinct functionality as services to these applications. And it works well when we're talking about the idea of APIs, but when we try and factor in the idea of styles to this, it becomes a little bit troublesome. And I'll run you through what this looks like a little bit. So we have our databases that basically store all of our content. And we have the actual clients or interfaces that will display that content that the databases hold. And our services will sit between these two, right? And the services are focused on that one unique functionality at a time. And they'll go out and they'll speak with one database, two databases, depending on how many they need. They collect that content and then serve it up into the actual clients. Now this works well. If we ever update the content inside of a database, all that content will then be updated across all of the clients, and it works out fairly well. But the idea of design doesn't fit into that. Our design is duplicated and replicated across all of these individual clients where that content's displayed. And if we ever want to change our design, we're stuck making that change in a handful of different applications. It's not a good position to be in. Now, the idea is we want to have this modular, maintainable, and predictable styles around our applications. Right? We're not thinking about terms of building web pages. We're thinking about building a system. We're trying to define styles that we'll use across all of our applications, not even styles that will be used just in one application. Right? We're thinking more holistically around that. We're thinking in the terms of a system here. And we'd like to share some of our most basic assets, right? That being CSS, JavaScript. If you're using a preprocessor, that falls into Sass or CoffeeScript, images, fonts, so on and so forth. Right? But how do we get this? How do we get style as a service inside of our applications? We wrote our own application we call Rolodex. So Rolodex serves as a Ruby gem or a Bower package, and it allows us to basically plumb our styles into these applications. And I'm going to talk briefly about how we built this and show you our steps through it. And please keep in mind, this is like our approach to it. Yours may vary, and that's totally fine. But hopefully you can pick up from what we've done as well. So, a bit about the process of what we've done. You have these applications, right? Say you have a home page and a style guide tied to it. For us, our toolkit sits in the middle, right? And the toolkit is where these styles live. And the toolkit will go out and speak to the home page, it'll speak to your style guide, and plumb your styles into it. But we did something kind of unique, right? A lot of companies will go out and build a style guide and then use that style guide to go out and build their other applications. We didn't do that. We've tried that in the past. We find that those styles written in a style guide are basically written in a closed environment, and they're a bit idealistic. They don't actually turn out the way you'd hope they would. So we reversed that. We built our homepage. We documented the common styles that we'd see ourselves using over and over in different type of applications, and moved those into the toolkit. Once they're in the toolkit, we then documented those into the style guide. Right? So the toolkit itself is nothing but those raw source assets of CSS, JavaScript, what have you. Right? The style guide is actually a client of our toolkit, of which is just the documentation of it. Right? Now, as these come together, you can see all the styles live inside the toolkit, and they're imported into the other applications. Now, much like our databases hold the content, our toolkit holds all of our styles. And if we ever wanted to change our brand color of blue or what have you, we can make that change in one place, and we can watch that change then take place across all of our other applications. Whereas before, we'd be stuck saying, oh, we redesigned our buttons, so let's go out and change them in the home page, and change them in our merchant page, and in our analytics tools, right? It would be a very daunting, long, large process to change those styles. We don't have to face that when we have the toolkit helping us out, which is pretty nice. So some implementation details around how we did this. One of the hardest things we come across is naming, right? Those who program, who are engineers, I think they'll get behind me in saying that naming is probably the hardest part about the job, right? And for us, we followed a few simple patterns here. You can use the block element modifier, SMAX, or object-oriented CSS to try and name your styles. We used a mix of those. Our styles are named for their functionality, right? What is the content actually doing? What is it performing? We made our styles very developer-friendly, right? We didn't necessarily try and optimize them and make them the smallest classes you've ever seen. We know that we are, as engineers, first and foremost, the ones interacting with those styles, and we wanted to be able to read them, right? We wanted to be able to jump in this code base in a month and know what those styles actually meant and work through those. We also strive to write our names for predictability, right? So that we can almost at times guess what our classes were going to be and not have to look them up. So for example, you may have classes that look a bit like this. Does anyone have any guess what like PR stands for? Any? No? What about UN? UN's a little tricky too. Right? The problem is you don't know what these classes mean. Thus, they're pretty difficult to actually work around. The only way you'll figure out what these classes mean is by looking those up in the markup and seeing what they correlate to. And cognitively, that's a lot of work to do, and it would slow you down if you had to do that day in and day out. These styles are also a bit deeply nested, right? So their specificity is growing, their portability is being limited, and this is only going to get worse over time. Things are going to back up, right? And this is not going to help us out long term. Now, PR was price, UN was unit, but you wouldn't have known that unless you looked it up. We need to change this though, right? We're using better naming. We've set these down to the same strength, so their specificity is limited now, and the styles here are more modular, right? We can move these around. Unit doesn't have to live within price for it to work, right? We have more flexibility, we have more maintainability around what we're actually doing. Now, we're also doing things that are more predictable for us, right? Here are the styles for our buttons. They're very simple, very basic. Anyone can pick these up and read these. Now, if you started to think about what were our alerts going to look like, we named our alerts in par with how we named our buttons, right? You could almost guess what the styles for the alerts are going to be. Along the same nature, you could guess what the label styles are going to be as well, right? You don't have to go back and keep looking that stuff up. We're following a general pattern here. We're trying to keep it simple. It obviously gets much more difficult than this, but we're trying to stay consistent and rally around some simple naming conventions that we'll all understand. Now, inside of this, we follow the single responsibility principle. That is, we'll break up our styles, our modules, into the smallest components possible, right? We want our styles to be independently created and encapsulated. That is, sections of styles should do one thing only, and one thing really well, right? And we're going to continue to break our styles down until we find that right level of modularity. So for example, this would give you the style of an alert. And this alert perhaps is an error, right? So it's giving you a red text color, red background. But if we look at this, there's a lot going on here, right? These styles aren't independently created or encapsulated, right? We can't really reuse these styles for anything other than an error at this point. It's kind of hard to work around, right? We're kind of stuck in just only using this as it stands. Not what we're looking for. We could break these apart though, right? We could take all those shared common styles and abstract them. Our border radius and our padding are the alert styles that are going to appear on every alert, regardless if it's an error, a success message, information, you name it. Those are going to be shared, so let's abstract those. Let's then create another module specific to the actual error itself. That is that red background, that red text, right? We can then combine those combine those classes on a given element for more styles, and we can overlay these, right? So now we can create alert for success and not have to duplicate the border radius and padding, right? We can work around this stuff pretty simply. Now, as you're doing this, you also want to measure your improvements, though. And this is a very important part. I can't really underemphasize how important this is. So run inventory of your code, profile it, see where you stand today, figure out what you're trying to improve, and work through it. Define what those key progress indicators are. And there's a handful of applications that will help you do this as well. So style stats and web page test will give you very detailed stats. Those are very quantitative results, right? They'll give you very strict numbers of things you can improve. A few other tools out there would be CSS, and CSS lint, which are more basically like qualitative. They're going to tell you exactly where you can make improvements and really dial it down for you to where you can improve what you're doing. So here's a bit of what we did at Belly. V1 for us was using Twitter's Bootstrap. We used it exactly as Bootstrap was intended, to bootstrap some of our websites and get going. But we found ourselves hitting a wall in a lot of that, right? As noted by the number of important keywords we had to pull up as well. So we pulled Bootstrap out, and we dropped in Rolodex, our own framework, and started rewriting a lot of the code tied to this. And you can see, we were able to cut our file size nearly in half, right? That has massive performance implications. Those styles are also smaller, so they're easier to maintain and easier to work with as we grow, right? The number of rules and selectors also all dropped, right? And those were kind of our key progress indicators to say, hey, can we get the number of rules and declarations down as well? And we were able to do so pretty substantially. Looking at properties more specifically, we were able to drop a lot of these down. Now, these weren't exactly too important to us, but again, we had that baseline. We wanted to make sure that we weren't overstepping our bounds. I think these numbers will go up over time as we grow as a company, as we have more applications in the wild. But knowing where we're at today and where we're heading helps us out quite a bit. So, a few final thoughts I'll leave you with here. A lot of people don't like the idea of using a framework. They're like, hey, our website will all look the same. It's like, well, that's actually kind of the point, right? We want our styles and our websites to all look and feel as if they were one and share a consistent style and brand behind those. But we want it to be ours, right? We don't want it to be anyone else's. Thus, we went out and set and slowly built our own framework to do this. Now, having this framework allows our developers not to worry about how the website's going to look, right? They can worry about how it's actually going to operate, what it's going to do, how it's going to function behind the scenes, right? They don't have to worry about how it actually appears. And our designers don't have to worry about how consistent the design's going to be, right? They can use and lean on that actual framework to get that stuff done, right? Everyone then has the ability to move in between teams without any learning curves, right? We all know what the code bases will look like. We all know a definition of standards of what our style should be too. So, a few thoughts to keep in mind there. Code is complicated, right? Don't overthink about it. Just have patience, right? Be willing to learn, grow, refactor, and rewrite parts of your style guide over time. You're undoubtedly going to learn more and more as you work through some of this stuff. Also document your code too, though, right? If you're going to step away from this for a month or 2 months and come back to it, if that code isn't apparent as to what it's actually doing, you should probably leave some notes in that file around what that code actually does for you, right? And do this consistently, right? It's going to slow you down a little bit, and that may be a hesitation point. But I guarantee slowing down just a little bit will also allow you to write smarter, more intelligent code, right? If you actually have to write down what it's going to do, you're going to think about it for a second time and perhaps find a better way to write it, right? You might find a better way to refactor some of that. So, in all though, right, you have to focus around what you're doing. Focus on actually having an understanding and controlling the code you're writing, okay? That's like the number one key important thing you're going to do here. Nothing's going to be perfect the first time you set out and do it. Understand that, realize that. Don't get hung up on it though, right? Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And above all, just make sure you enjoy what you're doing, right? Actually focus and enjoy the work you're doing, because that will then allow you to continue to do better and better work. That is what I have for you. Cool? Thank you.